let's get down to the nitty-gritty of how to close a deal. So I think last week we left off with this idea of selling to a business, and we were going to talk about advertising, selling advertising, and that's such a great thing to use as an example of what to sell because it's extremely competitive and also very hard to quantify. You can quantify, this is interesting, in advertising, you can quantify impressions, but what you can't qualify is the quality of those impressions.
Right.
I can tell people I have this many listeners, we have this many views, we have this many whatever, but the quality of it is extremely important, and there's probably no way to quantify that exactly. So sales is a great way. It's a great way to make the point. So we were talking about selling to a business, and we bridged the gap and made the point that you're actually still selling to a person, and that person is still going to make their decision based on comfort, convenience, or prestige. So let's talk about how those three things might happen in a business. What do you think? You're an executive, advertising buyer at a big motor corporation. How would comfort come into your decision to decide to go with advertising?
It's not only is it a great question, it's really pertinent to someone who now owns and runs a podcast network. Because when I started this out, anybody I had doing sales for me would go out and talk to big companies. The big companies would go, "What's a podcast?" Now, salespeople are going out and talking to big companies, and the companies are going, "Oh yeah, we think it's time for us to get into podcasting." So they're more comfortable with the idea. And we all know from watching TV and listening to the radio, there are a lot of terrible advertisements out there. There are big companies spending a lot of money to produce ads that are horrible, that probably don't benefit them, but they're comfortable with that medium. They're comfortable with the formula that's been used before, so they do it. And everybody in the podcast business, and you being an innovative thinker in your businesses, knows that what we have to do is get people to think differently about these things.
So, okay, how about convenience then? How would an advertising buyer at a big corporation, what would indicate that they were a convenience buyer?
To me, those things, and you're probably telling me I'm wrong, but to me, those things would almost be linked in that it's very convenient to set for like a car dealer to go down the same paths everybody else is covered. It's easy. You follow the same formula. The paperwork's already drawn up. The contracts are already drawn up. All you have to do is fill in the right price, which is might be predetermined. It's easy. It's an easy process.
Yeah. How about just getting things ready? What if, let's say you have they feel comfortable. Yep, love podcasts, want to head down that road. But I mean, let's face it, there's a billion podcasts they could go to, right? And convenience could be something like, yes, I'm going to do an ad. Will you just do it for me?
Right. Oh, that's good. I hadn't thought of that. And that's
and you might say, well, no, we just need you to get your art department or your marketing department to just put together the 30-second ad.
The real answer to that question, of course, by the way, if you're listening, is yes, we will do an ad for you.
Right.
Go ahead.
And most places will to bridge the gap of the convenience. It might also be just something like, how easy is that person to get a hold of? If they became interested and it took a week for you to get back to them, or that could be a comfort thing too. And that's what'll happen in these when you're trying to define the reason people buy. Is it's going to kind of it's going to involve possibly all three, but there'll always be a predominant one, and we want to find the predominant one because that's what we want to focus on. And then prestige, how does that's an easy one with advertising.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in your case, the reason we have advertisers lined up at the door is because they get to advertise on a podcast network that is run by one of the premier American sports writers of our generation. And who wouldn't want to be on that? I love the silence. This is so. If you could see the look on his face right now, this is so precious. Jim and I haven't known each other.
Why are you spending all that time kissing up to Michael Russo?
I don't even know Michael Russo. But someday maybe I will.
You will. You'll run into him. He'll need your help at some point.
Okay, so I said we'd get to the nitty gritty of some of this, but I also want to tee this off with. There's another important ingredient we didn't talk about on the last show that I wanted to, but we're going to bring it in right now. You have to love what you do. You have to love selling, and you have to love selling what you're selling. So if you're the business owner and you're selling your own company, obviously you're going to love your company. If you're a salesperson working for a company, if you really don't believe in the product, just get out. Mm-hmm. Just get out. Just don't try to sell something that you don't believe in for somebody that you don't believe in, right? It's never going to work. Or if it does, the amount of work you put in will never equal the amount of reward that you will get. Or maybe I put it a different way. Put in the same amount of work in a place where you love it for a company you love, you will get 5 times the return. And so you would be foolish to stay where you are and to do this. And the other thing I want to say is, if you don't love it right now, it doesn't mean that it is the company's fault, and it doesn't mean that it's the product's fault. You first must ask yourself, am I missing something? I run into salespeople all the time that will say, well, I want to be out there selling this stuff, but it's so competitive, and all these other companies are doing all these other great things, and they're doing it for a lot less money, and they're doing it, for this and that. It's just really, really discouraging. And I say, well, why don't you go work for them then? And you just basically said, right, the competition is offering more for less. So as a salesperson, that's a pretty easy sale, right? I mean, you're basically saying the algebraic, equation is, really quick over there. Why don't you do that? But you don't, because deep down inside, you know something. And so the first thing you should step back right now and say, am I supposed to love, am I missing something here? Am I not loving this for some reason? Cold calling. Cold calling is one of those things that most salespeople hate. They just hate to call a stranger, touch base with them.
I hate it even as a reporter.
Oh, I didn't think about the connection there. Okay.
I'll do it. But if I need to, and listen, I'm lucky. I'm a columnist. I don't always have to go. But as a reporter, as sheer reporter, which is what I was most of my career, which is how you get to be a columnist, I was constantly calling people who did not want to take my call.
That would be really, really difficult, because even as a salesperson, there's at least a 50-50 chance that you're going to hit on something. But when you're calling somebody about something controversial,
or not even controversial, you just might be calling somebody who just doesn't want to deal with the media, or doesn't want to talk to you in particular, or would rather talk to your competition, or in modern media, the NFL, they basically kind of dole out a lot of the news to the people they have billion-dollar contracts with, ESPN, Fox. Whatever. So you're not only fighting against the typical urge to not tell somebody you don't know something, you're fighting against economics.
And we now have 2 more unofficial show sponsors.
That's right. We're racking them up.
It's great. Well, maybe one day they'll pay.
Yeah.
This is awesome. That's interesting, because was there a turning point at which where you hated it? But you learned to, was it you learned to live with it, or did you ever learn at any point to enjoy that?
I never really liked it. And listen, maybe it's all writers are a little weird. I always loved writing. I always loved the creative process. I always loved, developing relationships, but I never liked the aspect of, I'm going to call somebody who doesn't want to talk to me and try to get them to talk to me. I just never enjoyed it.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's how most salespeople are with cold calling. I hear people say, well, it's the means to the end. It's
right.
You got to do your time. You got to do this. I was lucky enough to meet a guy. I hope he's listening. His name's Gary Plombon. When I started in the printing industry, I had that attitude. Well, I knew I was going to start at this new place. I knew I was going to have to cold call. I knew I was going to have to.
It's a bad attitude, I know.
Well, it's the opportunity to be unique. And so I'm so glad I met this guy who basically said, when I said something like that, and he said, what? Are you kidding? I love it. I wish I could do more of it. He said, as a matter of fact, how about on Fridays, you and I go into a conference room and let's just cold call together, because I miss it so much. And I thought, this guy is crazy. How can you love that? In 2 sessions, I learned to love it just like he did. Because first of all, you have to approach it. What can you lose, right? What's there to lose?
Yeah.
It was him or somebody else said, as salespeople, we have this crazy idea that we call somebody, and let's say we just really screw the phone call up. Like we say something really dumb. And this has happened to me, by the way. You think you're making some progress and somebody just schools you and you have no answer for it. And you're like, da, ba, boo, ba, right? And you are feeling like a heel. You hang up and this guy said, and in your head, that person stands up to everybody in their cubicle word and said, you should see the idiot that just called me. This guy, his name is Joe Leach. He works at this printing company, and I've never met somebody so stupid in my life. And he said, the reality is they hang up the phone, they shake their head, and they move on. They don't even remember you.
Yeah.
I'll tell a funny story. So I learned that and was teaching another person this whole thing. And I was sitting across from him, and he had a phone call where he made a cold call, and the person, all I see is he's opening this book and he's circling a name, and then he has this just unbelievably disgusted look on his face, and he hangs up. And I'm like, what was that all about? He said, this guy, I'm pitching him about our services, and he's sounding super nice and interested, and then he says to me, just out of curiosity, how did you hear about us, or where did you get my name? And I just told him, to be honest with you, I got your name out of a reference book of people that, do this kind of thing. And the guy's like, really? Do you have that book handy? And the guy says, yeah, I do. He says, open it up to the page that has my information in there. And he's like, yeah, okay. So he opens it up and he says, circle my name and write, never cold call this guy again. And so he's telling me the story. I'm like, call him back right now. It's not a cold call anymore.
That's so true.
And he did. And the guy busted up laughing. I'd love to tell the story that I know he turned him into a client or whatever, but he did call him back and the guy did laugh. The guy did appreciate it. So you have to approach it from a fun standpoint and a what's there to lose kind of an attitude. And you have to focus on the fun ones and not the rotten ones. And here's the deal. Get the rotten ones out of the way. You're going to screw up.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the problem. If you think I can make cold calls and never screw up, then you'll never make it. But get good at this, and you'll be great at it. This Gary that I was telling you about, trade shows too. We go to trade shows, and trade shows were usually boring. I call it the "How's your popcorn" move. Everybody would stand at the booth, waiting for people to come up and go, oh, well, what do you guys do? Well, if you've ever run a trade show, that never happens, right? I mean, it maybe sometimes it does, but almost never happens. So Gary was one of those people that would stand in the aisle. He wouldn't stand in the booth. He'd just stand in the middle of the aisle. And number one, it would slow people down because they want to come barreling past your booth, right? So he'd slow people down, and he would just come up with so many one-liners that they weren't corny. They were like, somebody would walk by, and I just remember this one. This lady's walking by. She's got a thing of popcorn, and he just looks at her. She walks by and goes, "How's that popcorn?" She's like, "Oh, it's good." He's like, "Where'd you get it?" She says, "It's back up over there." And he was sincere about it. He was going to get some popcorn later, and she stops and literally goes, "What do you do?"
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. And I threw my hands up and said, "This guy knows how to do it." So anyway, that will tell you a lot about whether you have it or not. If you can do the cold calling. So do the cold calling. All right. So here are the three things we want to talk about today. We want to talk about you have to solve a problem or you're not going to sell. You're not going to make a sale. If there's no problem to sell, move on, right? That's the most important thing. Know your prospect and know the buying motive. Know the comfort, convenience, or prestige. Know where they're coming from. And there might be, again, little sub variations of that. So you got to identify what makes them tick. And then number 3 is how you go about getting the pitch in. And I will just say this, you just don't want to pitch, right? My pitch to you is don't pitch. Don't do a sales pitch.
I can do that. I can not pitch.
It's never helpful. I'll show you a way to carry a dialogue on that will be helpful. So solve a problem. You got to get people to be on the same page as you. Right? And you have to talk about bridging the gap, or you have to think about bridging the gap. So we're selling advertising. You know this person. You've done a little research. You look at the advertisers they already have. Maybe they're kind of obscure advertisers. Maybe they're really big advertisers. Maybe there's a mix of each, but one's predominant over the other. What I might gather from that is this person's a prestige buyer. right? They like to be with the big companies if that's most of what they have. If they're all small companies, then I'm saying this person might be a comfort, convenience, or prestige in the opposite way. I like to be the big fish in the little pond, right? You can gather all kinds of information about that person. And then if you don't get what you need, you proceed with a phone call and you do some very, very basic things. Nitty-gritty stuff here, Jim. You ready?
I'm listening.
When you get a hold of somebody, and now phones are, I don't sell myself these days, but I would imagine that getting a hold of people on the phone is still a pretty common thing to do. This won't really apply, well, it might apply to email, but when you correspond with people, be 100% respectful and ask them for permission. The other thing is, if you ever introduce yourself and you're with somebody, always introduce your name, always introduce your company with your name last. This is why it's so important. People cannot remember two things.
I agree with that.
So when you say, my name's Joe Leach, I'm from Retail Endeavors, they're going to remember Retail Endeavors. They're not going to remember who you are. And the key here, if I'm the salesperson, is they're going to buy from me. So I want to say, I'm calling from Retail Endeavors. My name is Joe Leach. And they're going to remember it's Joe Leach. Then the next thing you're going to say is this a good time to talk or not? Some people are going to say, well, what's it about? Some people are going to say, yeah, it's just not a good time. In which you say, is there a better time? I would need maybe 5 minutes if you would give me 5 minutes. Or they might say, yeah, I got time now, but make it quick. Then you just want to have lined up what you want to know about them. And this is really important. Salespeople often have a list of questions. Don't have a list of questions. If you have a list of questions, you're going to sound like you're reading them, or you're going to sound like you're repeating them. Don't ever have a list of questions. Have a list, and make it a mental one. Have a list of the things you want to learn. It's not a distinction without a difference. It's very, very important that you say, what I want to know is why they buy from the other people. What I want to know is how their system works. What I want to know is this person the actual buyer or not? So I'm just going to have those pieces of information that I want to know in my head, and I'm going to carry on a casual conversation with that person that is going to be extremely respectful, because the adage you never get a second chance to make a first impression is extremely important in sales. And it's very important to the comfort side of any equation. Now, we talked about finding the predominant of the three. You also have to understand you're going to have a certain amount of all three to close a deal too. It's unlikely that you're going to have that one is going to completely overrule the rest. Or maybe I put it a different way. The sale is going to go a lot smoother if you have a good, healthy amount of each: comfort, convenience, and prestige. That's what you're going for. So you just ask questions. How long have you been doing this? Right? How long have you been at General Motors? Right? And they will tell you, oh, I've been here for 30 years. I do this. I mean, think of all the information you have when someone says, I've been here for 30 years.
Yeah.
Right? They're not new on the block. Right now, as far as probably being the decision maker, I'm thinking going to be tough to have somebody who's been there 35 years that's over, the top of what they do. Interesting. How is your department set up? You have to feel your way through some of this. Then you might say, obviously you do a lot of advertising. Can you tell me what's important to your advertising? Can you tell me what you feel works the best? And they will tell you all kinds of information about whatever. And all I'm doing is asking questions. I'm not pitching anything. I'm not saying, well, you want to advertise on our podcast because we have X thousands of listeners and they're predominantly business people. Because the person on the other end of the phone is going to say, yeah, that's what they all say, right? Now, you ask good questions. The person says, this person calling cares. Number two, this person knows what they're talking about. This person is being very careful not to assume that I'm a customer. And I'm not a target. I'm not any of those kind of things. And you build a rapport with the person by asking questions. I would challenge every salesperson out there to try this the next time you're in a sale. And you will find that in many cases, you'll be able to do it. Close a deal without ever making one pitch. Close a deal on questions only. That's my challenge for you. Today, when you do a deal, the only thing you should say that isn't a question is just any of the, well, those would be questions too to wrap things up. Like how do I close things up, so to speak. You can literally go through a whole sales pitch without telling anybody anything about the features, advantage, benefits of your product, because it's all going to come out. It's all going to come out. Now, it doesn't mean that when someone asks you a question, you ignore the answer, but you answer and then follow up with a question. But you don't launch into a pitch. So try a pitchless sale today, every salesperson out there, and report back, Twitter or Facebook, throw the boss out, and let us know.
We like feedback on the network. Please engage with us on Facebook, on Twitter. Go to the website, check that out, talknorth.com. We want this to be a dialogue.
Yes. So the danger, there's a little note here I want to make a point. The danger when you start pitching, and this is something you should try to avoid all the time, never tell the person about a feature they'll never use. Because remember, if people are given a choice in a vacuum, you said, do you want to buy something today or do you not want to buy something today? People would prefer not to buy something, right? It's just simpler. It's easier. There's no money going out, right? So they're on the side of saying, I'd prefer not to buy anything, right now. So the minute you give them any ammunition to say, oh yeah, I would never use that, you're dead. So you never pitch a feature, even if you are going to pitch. Like if you can't help but pitch, never pitch a feature that you know that they can't use. So ask a question that would tee that up, that feature. And if you ask a question and say, well, do you ever do this or that? And they go, nope, move on, right? I can't tell you how many times I've had people, they've asked me a question. Well, do you ever do this? And I say no. And but they insist, right? They insist on telling me about that feature.
Like trying to sell me a left-handed guitar.
It would be very much like trying to sell you a left-handed guitar. Other nitty-gritty notes from a salesperson. We've talked about creating the best first impression, asking permission. Let's talk about some of the things that they teach you in sales training, because I'm not here saying that none of that stuff works. I'm saying the opposite. I'm saying it all works great if you follow these fundamental rules that I'm trying to put forth and have people consider. Again, thinking differently. That's our goal here. Trial closes are great. That is a great tool. It's a question again, right? It's just one of our questions, but you ask questions along the way about how close they are to buying. Let's say you're trying to sell somebody advertising, and you're certainly not going to sell them, probably not going to sell them on the first phone call. But you might be having another conversation in the middle, and you might say something to somebody like, well, if you were to move forward, do you think you would want us to create the ad, or do you think that your people would create the ad? If the person says, whoa, time out, I haven't said that, then you're nowhere near.
Yep. And
if they say, oh yeah, I've thought about this, we would definitely have our, people, then you go, all right, you just do this kind of thing where you write down another tally and you say, oh, I'm making some progress here. And you gauge your progress and then just keep moving things forward. Again, you're not selling anybody. Do not sell anything to anybody. Stop that. Help people understand the features, advantage, and the benefits of your services, your products. Bridge the gap. That's your thing. And remember, there are sometimes you can't bridge the gap. And the sooner you figure that out, the better. Don't overdo that one, right? Don't just bail because it doesn't look good.
Right.
Make sure that you aren't going to get there. And then spend your time wisely. And closing, I asked the question actually on Twitter what we should talk about. And there was some great feedback, but one of them was, don't be afraid to close. And that is very, very true. Too often, we might have a sale and the customer just wants you, because again, if in a given day, do I want to buy something or do I want to not want to buy something? I'd prefer not to buy something. And so sometimes it's a favor to the customer to just go, are we there yet? Yep. Are we ready to do something? How about if I, and just be respectful. Say, am I sending a contract over? Mm-hmm. Is there something that are we at a point now where we want to do some paperwork? How are you, Jim, just to find out, how are you feeling about this, moving forward? That's kind of more of a trial close. But again, should I stop by? Do you want me to stop by later? We can wrap this up. Don't be afraid to do that. And it's very easy to come up with ways that are extremely respectful, really disarming, that even if they say, oh no, you'll find you've done a good job when they respectfully say, you know what, Jim? Yeah, I'm pretty close. but I just need to do right. Someday I'm going to buy a Strat. I need to have a few things kind of happen, before. So just between me and everybody that's listening, Jim's going to buy a Fender Strat from us. It's just going to take a little while. We just have to dot a few I's and cross a few T's, and I'm not going to let this one out of my purview. So, So I mean, what about the advertising? Ask me some questions. This is probably a little bit easier if I.
Well, and the weird thing for me is as a journalist, I can't, I'm kind of like bound to not go out and sell things. Journalists are not supposed to be salespeople. Now, I've had to run this organization. I've had to kind of steer salespeople. I've had to figure out a way to get my business running without really being a salesperson myself. So, we are talking about still a fairly new medium especially in terms of local podcast networks. There aren't many local podcast networks in existence. My thing is kind of a rare thing, and this is the first business show on my podcast. It's my first non-sports show on the podcast network. So how do we sell it? Give me just practical advice. How do we sell it? And I'll say even tougher than figuring out how you sell stuff to me has been, how do you find a good salesperson? Is it a case where all the good salespeople are already employed? How do you find a good salesperson?
Well, I think we might have talked about this in the first show. I find that I'm really pretty poor at picking salespeople, to be honest with you. Yeah, I thought it was going to be something I'd be really, really great at, but I wasn't. So I think you need to find ethical people that have that ability to talk to anybody, who have that attitude of what do I have to lose? What could go wrong, and realize that what could go wrong is not that big a deal in any case.
It's almost like, it always reminds me of dating. It's like dating, it's like the fear built into so many people that, I can't talk to the pretty girl or any girl, because she might shoot me down. If you could get over that, and we all had friends in high school or in college, the people who were not afraid of that did very well, because they didn't care if they got 8 girls turning them down, because the 9th girl says yes, they have a date, they're happy, but so many of us are worried about that first no.
Yeah, well, I'm going to be honest with you. I just married the first pretty one that said yes. I just did everything I could.
Me too.
I wasn't going to take my chances, Jim. I was like, she said
yes?
said, would you go? I said, would you go? You think you'd go out with me sometime? And she said yes. And I walked away going, all right, I locked it up.
There you go.
I didn't know when. So I had to go back and ask her. So could that be because I didn't know she was
sometime this year?
Right, exactly. And so I said, what about even tomorrow night? And she said, sure. And I was in, and I thought, I better figure out a way to marry this one, because this is probably not going to happen again.
We have to know our limitations.
Oh man. So the first thing about selling advertising for this show, I don't know that I would look at it from a standpoint of finding a salesperson, although that could be a very
or for my
ingredient.
Network in general.
I think it's like shooting fish in a barrel, that you just have to decide which fish you're going to shoot. And then you just have to put together a really great plan, and with the intentions of what do I want to learn about how why do they advertise elsewhere? Everybody you talk to has an advertising budget. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of, can I get so many $100 a week or whatever the rate is? Can I get that into that budget? And it's just a matter of connecting with the person that's making the decision and making a great impression. I think some statistics are going to be important, but I think more than anything, there's going to be an identity. Do I identify with this show? There might be people that for your sports shows, there might be just massive sports fans.
Yes, we've had that.
That just say, listen, that's my kind of people, and I connect with those people when they come in to my office, or I connect with those people if I'm out, if they come to my store, or if I'm out selling, I connect with those people, and so there's an identification connection. So it's just a matter of finding people like that. It's advertising is a numbers game. It's hard to differentiate where my dollars are going to best be spent. And let's face it, it's also very hard to know whether they're working or not.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, there are people who have huge advertisements on television, and they really don't know exactly how many people they're reaching, and they don't really know how well it's working.
our billboard. We have a billboard. We spend a lot of money on a billboard. We have people come in 2, 3, 4 times a day saying, I saw your billboard. Some buy, some don't buy. All I can look at it from a relative standpoint when I do that versus something else. It's really, really hard. This is interesting, even with Google Analytics data and Google AdWords that they show you, well, you converted.
Right.
You got a sale off of this. We know for a fact it's not accurate. It's usually accurate it's usually better than it says, but I don't know how much better.
Right.
And it would have to be because the cost per sale on something like that is still very, very high. So, but do I stop? No, because I'm afraid not to stop. So that's the beauty of selling advertising is that once people get comfortable, then they're unlikely to change unless some condition really changes. So it's absolutely a long-term sale. So, but if anybody wants to advertise on this show, tell them how to do it, or how do we see? Jim and I are still working this thing out. He was telling me about podcasts. I don't know much about podcasts. I don't know about selling advertising.
Well, like I said, I have always been a content person. I hate the word content, but it does describe what we do. And so I find it easy to do good shows with good people. The business side has been the more challenging side. I think we're getting things rolling here now. I have a business advisor. I have a business show where I'm learning a lot about business. I have good sales people now. So if somebody wants to advertise on this particular, if somebody wants to advertise on the network in general, they should email me, jsouhan@startuping.com. I would say if somebody wants to advertise on this show specifically, they should talk to you. It's your show. How do they reach you?
They can reach me. I think the best thing to do is am I too old to say this? Hit me up on Twitter.
Hit them up on Twitter.
Can you hit me up on Twitter?
Hit them up on Twitter.
Hit me up on Twitter. Face me on FaceTime. Facebook,
and you can always email me.
Just social media. Hey, just social media the hell out of me. That's all I'm asking is just let me know. I don't really have a business email address, but you know what? I've just decided that I'm going to get a throw the boss out email address.
Well, that'd be perfect. That'd be perfect for the show, and people can just go right to you.
Yeah. So by the time this airs, this is going to be risky, but I'm going to do it. Just send an email to advertising@throwthebossout.com.
There you go.
And that'll reach me. Or you can hit me up on Twitter. Because I don't know if anybody's ever hit me up on Twitter. I don't know what that really means. Other than
it sounds cool, though.
That they've said something on Twitter.
Makes you sound 10 years younger.
Just hit me up on Twitter.
And you can always reach out to me.
Jim, I am 20 years younger.
That's a good point. I think everybody's 20 years younger than me.
At any given time, I can be 20 years younger.
Well, I'll tell you a story. My wife is 8 years younger than me, but she looks like 30 years younger than me. And so we'll be walking around town.
I'm so glad you cleared that up for me.
Yes. We'll be walking around town.
I didn't have to ask.
Yes. We'll be walking around town and we'll get a dirty look, right? And we have a game we play. Say, okay, angry sports fan or offended older lady. Because some people look at us and you can tell, okay, I wrote something that ticked them off. Sometimes they'll look at us and it's like, okay, he or she thinks I'm robbing the cradle.
And what's wrong with that?
No, well, nothing. It just didn't happen. 8 years isn't that big a deal.
You know what? Is it a little bit like
when you're 84 years old? 8 years isn't that big a deal.
What this show's coming full circle. I can't remember if we talked about it in this show and our last show, but it's a lot like telling somebody how good a deal you got on something.
Yeah, yeah, so true. Oh yeah. This is great. He's Joe Leach. This is Throw the Boss Out. This is part of the TalkNorth.com Minnesota Podcast Network. This is our business show on what is quite often largely a sports network. Check out Cheryl Reeves' new show, The Flow, which is millennials talking to millennials. And this show and all the old sports war horses, check it out at TalkNorth.com. Hit us up on Twitter. Hit us up on Facebook. And advertise with us. It'd be fun.
Jim, thanks so much for keeping me involved in this.